Chapter 6. Nobility is not the same thing as bravery. Nobleman Jesse Lincoln. Private notes. Wait, did I? Okay. Nobility is not the same thing as bravery. Nobleman Jesse Lincoln. Private notes. For more than 3 decades, General Esmar Tuick had served House Lincoln, first as a member of the Guard Force, then working his way up to security chief. In earlier years, he had tried to keep Jabba Lincoln from accidentally killing himself, and the same with Lincoln's eldest son, Hugo. But those noblemen had gone to great lengths to avoid using what little brains they had. Now, at long last, Tuek had a chance to serve someone with a solid head on his shoulders. Jesse was a thoughtful man, willing to perform honest work for what he wanted, much loved by his people back on Catalan. But was the young nobleman just as big a fool as his predecessors for letting himself be goaded into Valdemar Hoskener's challenge? Perhaps it would still end badly. Racing to rescue the stranded spice harvester, Gurney Halleck handled the controls of the transport ship with a kinesthetic accelerator connected to his fingertips. English stood behind him in the cockpit, struggling to hold his balance while guiding their course. The roaring ship flew so low over the dunes that the noise of its passage rattled the sands. Looking back through the aft porthole, 2X saw a monstrous worm surface just behind him, questing with its blind head. The spice foreman had suggested a low and erratic flight pattern to confuse the creatures, and hopefully to prevent them from going after the disabled equipment. "They're unpredictable beasts," English said. "I wouldn't count on anything. There's never been a truly safe or effective means of harvesting melange." 20 years before, Donnell Mornay, an inventor with the Third Imperial Expedition to this desolate planet, had developed the initial techniques for excavating spice, under contract from the young Grand Emperor Wuda. Mornay's early harvesters had been much smaller machines, and when most of them were devoured by worms, he conceived the flying carryalls to lift the mobile factories to safety and deposit them at other rich spice veins, a leapfrog process that always kept the harvesters one step ahead of the worms, when everything worked properly. The Hoskeners improved the guerrilla mining technique with larger harvesters and more powerful carryalls. With any luck, and Tuek wasn't sure if House Lincoln had any left, Jesse might further refine the techniques. Finally, the fast transport reached the weathered spice harvester sitting in the orange and brown sand. The quiet machine looked like a frightened rabbit huddling motionless, hoping not to be noticed. "A rich, rich vein," English said, his voice dismal. "A shame to just abandon it. We'll salvage what we can from the cargo holds, if there's time," Jesse said, watching tensely. "The crews made a good haul before they got into trouble. I've already called for help from the Carthage shipping yards. More carriers are on the way." As the rescue transport arrived, a flurry of small Ornajets rushed in from the west. Hovering overhead, 5 of them dipped vacuum tubes into the harvester's cargo hold, sucking up melange like hummingbirds sipping nectar. Tuek dropped a rescue chute onto the sand beside the massive vehicle and switched on the mechanism's motors. Put it in reverse, Jesse ordered. I'm going down myself. My lord, you don't need to do that. With all this increased activity, a worm will come soon. Bet on it. I didn't ask your opinion, General. Hearing the rebuke in the nobleman's voice, Tuek did as he was told. Worm sign. Less than 20 minutes out, English shouted, listening to a report from the Ornajet scouts. They have to hurry. Get salvage crews right now. Offload the spice. Save the melange. Damn the spice, Jesse called. Save the men. He rode the stepped conveyor down to the sand. More than 50 sand miners had already boiled out of the harvester, seasoned freemen and convicts still working off their sentences, along with new arrivals from Catalan. Jesse urged the men into the rescue chute. From above, Tuek barely heard their voices over the machinery sounds as he reset the conveyor. Tuek saw a mound of sand coming toward the shutdown harvester. The old veteran set the conveyor to ascend as rapidly as possible. More and more men made it to safety. Gurney said, That machine's already scrap metal for the worms. Desperate crewmen streamed out of the stranded harvester and ran across the sand toward the rescue chute. Dust-encrusted workers began to spill into the transport ship, spreading through the passenger compartment. English and Tuek guided them to the back, shouting for the men to cram together. Faster! Worms coming! Faster, damn you! Moments later, Jesse tumbled into the passenger compartment himself, staggering with an injured sand miner over his shoulder. The man's sleeve was torn and bloody, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. Tuek grabbed him, taking the weight from Jesse. Here, my lord, let me help. Take him, Esmar. There's still more down there. More men. Wrestling the nobleman clear, Tuek looked back down the chute, where 6 frantic sand miners scrambled onto the rescue conveyor. Relieved of the injured man, Jesse turned, ready to climb back down and lend more assistance on the ground. Then a giant mouth, ringed with glittering crystal teeth, broke through the sand and shot up toward the bottom of the chute. Tuek smelled a nauseatingly strong belch of cinnamon and felt the heat of the monster's exhalations. 4 men screamed as they tumbled into the maw. The straining transport lurched into the air, and then the worm seized the end of the conveyor. English shouted from the cockpit, and Gurney lifted the ship higher until the chute finally tore free. Suddenly loose, the aircraft recoiled up into the hot desert sky. 2 remaining workers dangled from the torn end, trying desperately to hold on. The blind worm sensed the cleaning sand miners, and with a more vigorous lunge the beast bit off the rest of the chute, taking them with it. Inside the passenger compartment, the terrified crewmen screamed. The transport craft spun and wavered unsteadily in the air, struggling to pull away. "Higher!" English shouted. Gurney responded, optimizing the kinetic controls. Staring down through the whistling gap, Tuek watched the worm turn its wrath on the abandoned spice harvester. The rescued crew chief hunched on the deck, shaking dust out of his hair and bemoaning the disaster. "Must be 20 sand miners lost. 8 of them freedmen we rehired. All good men." Jesse sat numb and exhausted, staring through the aft porthole. "I don't want to send more crews out until we can protect them. Let the Boskiners burn in hell. I won't commit murder. He shook his head. I hope some of the new equipment arrives soon. We don't seem to have benefited much from paying extra for the rush delivery. Tuek wanted to chide the nobleman for risking himself, but he would not do that in front of the men. Interestingly, because of Jesse's actions, the rescued crews looked at him with a strange, newfound respect. Tuek also viewed the nobleman through fresh eyes. Perhaps Jesse was the sort of leader who could inspire men to overcome their fears, despite bad equipment and dangerous working conditions. The sand miner crews needed that as much as they needed new machines. Perhaps, despite the tremendous odds they faced, House Lincoln would survive after all.